Colin, this is definitely not how we wanted the season to end. It's hard to believe it was just 2 weeks ago that we were excited for the playoffs to start. I don't think we expected the Cavs to win in 7 games, but to ultimately lose in 5 feels like a disgrace. Who do you think is to blame for this series' defeat, ultimately?
You and I have talked about this back and forth off air, and we've mentioned it to our friends and family. I think that when you have people who are in our lives outside of the podcast, you vent as much as you can. So I'll try to be as detailed and specific in this and not go off on a diatribe. I think ultimately the blame goes with JB. We did the podcast with Tony and Jackson, and we talked about how we'd like to give JB his flowers, because I do think he's an underrated coach at times. But I think in this instance, I am putting the blame almost solely on him. I do think the players underperformed, but I think that JB did some stuff that wasn't just head scratching, it was anti the success of the team. When you look at how he kept putting Karras in the starting lineup, well, okay, it worked. It didn't work in any game. I just tried to say, it worked in game 2. It didn't work in game 2 because Karras came off the bench in game 2. That didn't work, and he just kept getting out-coached by Thibodeau in every facet. And a lot of that was because Thibodeau trusted his guys to execute, and JB didn't. I think another thing that JB did that was really frustrating was that he didn't really know who to rely on, and he tried to rely on Rubio, which no, we've already gone up that small little hill, and that was not great. And then he tried to rely on Danny Green, even though he barely played Green in the regular season. So Green is a good player. I was glad that he got out on the floor, but he didn't have. You just bypassed Dean Wade, Lamar Stevens. Heck, even Isaiah Mobley got more face time with these current starters than Danny Green. And I just think that ultimately JB blinked. And I think that the organization honestly has to have a serious conversation with what they should do with him, because something that my brother brought up with me, he and I talk a lot about this team, is when you're a small market organization and you think that you can go into the offseason and attract talent, but you've already publicly stated that that's difficult to do because that's why you traded for Donovan Mitchell. Your X factor has to be your coaching staff. Yes, you have to have talented players, but your coaches have to be even better than the larger market teams, because your talent pool is different. It's not that it's worse, but you don't have the ability to say, let's use the mid-level exception here, and let's use it also on this guy. And we've gone through that as Cavs fans with all the stuff with LeBron. LeBron couldn't bring in free agents that were quality at times. So I think that they really need to figure out what to make of this coaching staff if they want to get the best talent out of this team.
Well, I don't disagree with you. I don't think it's a tough thing. I mean, blame. I hesitate to not put it on everyone. Mm-hmm. Every player, every coach, everybody in the organization. I don't think that the Cavaliers, when they acquired Mitchell, I don't think they got very creative for the rest of the year about what they were going to do to build out this roster. And I think that when Kevin Love announced that he wanted to be traded, that blindsided the organization and the coaching staff. And now they were down a piece that they were going to rely on. And I firmly believe that. I think that they were trying to rest him for the regular season so they could use him now, the way that Miami's using him. And something that I just thought of when you were talking about the coaches, is that at the start of the year, I remember that when we picked up Mitchell, in the first interview I heard Bickerstaff talk about it, he was saying, well, the only negative, and I don't know if he used that word, but the only negative was that they had schemed for guys they don't have now. And it was going to take a while for them to figure out how to scheme for the new people, which really it was just one guy. And I wonder if that is a little bit of a window into how JB works with his coaching staff. And that even what happens in the playoffs. Okay, so they come in with a very specific game plan, and it falls apart. But they don't seem to be a team that stops, drops, and rolls when that happens. They said at the beginning of the year they need time to think about how they want to use these guys. And so I think when they lost Love, I think they hoped Danny Green would come along quickly, but he couldn't get the minutes with this team that Love had. That wasn't going to happen. Love had worked with these guys for years. And now, all of a sudden, the depth that we thought we had on our bench, because Rubio didn't come along, and because Jetty was underused for half of the season, and because Lamar Stevens is, favored and then not, and then favored and then not. I mean, that's where I pick on the coaches. They don't. They did not prepare these players to be able to be the next person up when the people that they were relying on had off nights, and it just so happened that our guards, our star guards, our all-star guards were non-existent in 3 straight games. Well, how do you scheme for that? On a team that really you don't have the depth anyway, but you don't have coaching staff that's thinking about using depth. So I don't disagree with you, but then on the other side, the players didn't show up, and the coaches didn't have a lot of choice down the bench at that point. It's tough to assign blame when it feels like everyone could have been better. And therefore, that's my expectation now going into next year. I want this team just losing sleep every night. Everybody that works for the Cavs, whether they're the ball boy all the way up to the manager's office and into the marketing department and down into the locker room, I want everybody to feel a pit in their stomach until they're back in this situation again next year, and then they can prove to themselves and the rest of the country that they deserved to be here, because we know they did. But now they've done kind of the worst thing possible that you can do to a fan base, which is think that, oh, you're good in the regular season.
Right.
And, honestly, I was saying this to a coworker the other day, like, these things make me feel like the regular season should be shortened. Because what is the point? If we were the best fourth quarter team in the league and we had all these come from behind games and all this stuff, but we had so many particular flaws all year long that you can survive in a regular season, but you can't survive them in the playoffs, and that's exactly why we died so quickly.
I totally agree with you that everybody has blame to go around, and I think that the players and the coaching staff especially would agree with you on that. I just think that in what I'm hearing from other folks in talking about and how they're discussing this team, they're looking at, okay, how does this team move forward? And for me, I agree with that mentality of like, okay, the best way to move forward is with the talent on this roster because it's so young and their ceiling is so high. I just think that with this series, I question some of the decision-making around how to fully implement that talent. Specifically, you look at, we know that Isaac Okoro is up and down, but Okoro played actually pretty well in Game 5, and I think that you and I would say, yeah, he hasn't done everything that we've wanted him to do, but we'd also agree that the coaching staff hasn't done him any favors in certain scenarios.
No, they haven't believed in him enough for him to be successful.
Yeah. So that's where I kind of get into this situation where mentally the gymnastics of when is the right time, and I don't have to make this decision, and you don't either, luckily.
Right.
But there is a decision and a crossroads where I honestly think that JB is going to be on an extremely short leash, because if Okoro comes out again and he looks just as tentative as he does offensively at times this next season, that's on the coaching staff.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
For me, there's a level of, basically I would say that JB in my mind is on notice. The rest of the guys, I agree, should lose sleep. But I wouldn't put a lot of these players on notice. Maybe some of the role players, because that's what happens in the off season. Like, I'm not targeting anyone. I'm just saying that just happens. But yeah, I would say, the term, he's on thin ice, just because it is tough to say, like, okay, well, we know that we have all this youth and we know we have all this talent. Right. Well, let's see Mobley be even better offensively. Let's see some offensive sets that bring other talent that's young out onto the floor, because that would be helpful.
And I don't, I guess that the question to me is about blame, and I have a hard time pointing the blame solely on him. But as far as him being in the hot seat the most, because, you can't really get rid of anybody else as easily, and you don't really want to yet. And I understand the fan base. We talked about it at the top. The fan base is talking about Allen being traded, but that's just emotions getting the better of people right now, and not understanding that maybe Allen just needs to be utilized in a different way, and that maybe this year that's my biggest complaint overall, that the coaching staff did not, and JB's the leader of that, right? But they did not guide these players through the regular season to be prepared for this series. And there was nothing more glaring of that until we saw the series happen. And ultimately, I think back now to all of these regular season wins and these, fun games and all this stuff. And really, we should have lost those games. It would have been more valuable to the learning experience of the players. Instead, the coaching staff was trying to win games. And I think that this year should have been more about winning or losing. What did you learn? How did you grow? And are you prepared for that next level that nobody gets to see until the playoffs begin? Because the regular season's so watered down that, great for you. Go play hero ball and win all the fourth quarters. But you just got humiliated in 5. So...
Thank you for listening to the Cavaliers Basketball Club podcast. Let's go Cavs!